Hello, Smarts here, and welcome to the video commentary for Myth of Eustro Chapter 4, which is called Slow Awakenings. um, okay, let's just start this by talking about this cover. Um, it's the second animated loop cover I did for the series. It's honestly way less dynamic than it should be, but honestly, I couldn't think of anything to do for a cover, and I don't know, these sparkly things all around the elf lady just they sort of seemed appropriate. I really shouldn't have just kind of pushed out an animated loop cover, but I wanted to make that a part of the entire experience of Myth of Eustro, but I didn't know what to do for this cover. Anyways, oh well, I could say the corrupted Ark's relic turning into wax was definitely inspired visually by by that early sequence in uh, Princess Mononoke, where the boar god melts away after Ashitaka, I believe is how you pronounce his name, after he kills it in its demon form. And all the skin melts off, and then it's just the bone, and then like the skeleton, and then the skeleton does that weird morphing melt thing that they did. Um, I'm sure they were just morphing the like a matte painting or a painting of it, but whatever. Still, I thought that it was just the thought of like a pile of wax melting in the sun. It was hard for me to think of how it would look. And so eventually with this, I just went ahead and used steam rising off of it. And actually, now that I look at it, I guess the corrupted Ark's relic, it lost its corrupted magic properties because Ramona totally touched that. That's not good. That's really not good that she's gone ahead and touched that. I'll have to think about that later. Huh? um. Oh well, this sequence. Ah, gosh, it didn't have the impact that I wanted it to. The throwing. I wanted it to have the swing in the elf lady's arm. I wanted it to have that same sort of thrust, the weight behind it that she had when she threw the boomerang sword, and I couldn't get it right. I tried a million times on these pictures, and this is this is me. I'm speaking from several chapters in the future, but at this point with chapter 4, I was still doing the pages all by hand. I hadn't moved to doing fully 100% digital production yet. So I drew this on paper, and then I had to go back and redraw it and redraw it and redraw it over and over and over until I got something that looked kind of strong. But still, it looks weird. And I'm guessing those are, I don't know, lawn darts that she's throwing into the Baroth's heads. I don't. Also, I'm wondering if it maybe doesn't come across that she's throwing them at different ones and not the same one. I know that the Baroths mostly all just kind of look the same. I mean, you can see them along the top panel that they look the same, just different sizes. Maybe their tufts of hair are a little bit different. But in the sequence when she's throwing those lawn darts, it looks like she just hit the same one twice or something. I kind of regret not maybe changing the angle on that on like one of the two of them to make it look like it's different, or maybe just showing like two of them in frame side by side, so that so that you're aware that it's a different animal, that she's actually hitting different animals. I don't know. It needed a lot of things, especially that impact. Like the aggression behind her throw to show that she's really really passionate about purifying the land, and she has strong feelings towards our kind. Like I wouldn't say hate, but strong. Um, but oh, and then the final panel is really that's the first time that you really it's really shown in the series at this point that all Arcane Capatch when they're when they're hit. That's the way that they are killed. It's really just that I was thinking a lot about just tons of RPGs, JRPGs that I've played, in my life, in that, especially like it stems from early in my childhood playing the Dragon Quest series, um, which I guess then it was Dragon Warrior, but still there was also a cartoon at the time when I was introduced to it. There was a cartoon and that came on early in the mornings, and one of the things that stuck with me was that Baramos, the bad guy, the main bad guy, the demon villain of the whole series, or at least the whole animated series, but not that series of games. A couple of the games are his relatives. Anyways, no, they're not his relatives. I think there's somebody else, one of the other enemies' relatives. But that's neither here nor there. But the thing about Baramos and his monsters that impressed me as a kid and stuck with me was that he created the monsters out of jewels. Like he just had this bed of water that sat below his feet, and it was just like this inside of his floating monster base thing. There was this bed of water, and I guess it was magical water, but along the bed, the bottom of I guess that is the bed of this thing, this stream of water, were all these jewels and different shapes, different sizes, different colors, and he would make them sort of hover in the air, and he'd combine different ones, and they would create these different monsters in the Dragon Quest universe. And I just remember being really, really impressed by that. And that when you killed the monsters, then they reduced back down to those jewels, but they weren't magical anymore. They were just regular jewels that you could spend in the market. And one of the characters in the series, that's what she did. She collected. That's all she did. She just was out there fighting monsters and just collecting jewels. She had her reasons. I mean, she was trying to... they never resolved it, but she was trying to raise enough money to find her two younger brothers that were taken away from her when her parents died. And they went on... yeah, I've gone off on a complete tangent telling you about a completely different story, but that's what inspired me. All of that was conveyed just through those little details in Dragon Quest, and all that stuff stuck with me. And I just like the idea of monsters sort of exploding into magical dust and then dropping items. It's such a weird thing that happens in video games, and certainly like in D&D. You don't see it visually in D&D, but you get it in video games, and I like that. So a lot of video game and sort of tabletop D&D, all those kind of tropes they keep showing up in this series because they fit in this world, and I really love those ideas. So she has just the crystals showing up, and the crystals they're definitely. I'll get more into them later in the series, but they do have a purpose in this universe, and it's not like I wanted to make it different than they were for for Dragon Quest, where they were just reduced to regular jewels that you could spend like money. These are being collected for a reason. Yeah. Oh, I guess. Yeah, I can talk about in this page the many pockets on the elf lady's cloak and what they do, which eventually I'll get more in depth within the story. I want to save that as an in-story conversation that she and Ramona have. I still haven't gotten to that point yet, but once we'll eventually get there. I I was proud of. I was actually proud of the way that the bracer looks. It's the Scorpius bracer, I believe is what it's called. I don't really remember, and how magical it looks. I was really happy with how that turned out, and kind of mostly happy with this sequence where she's using this. I'll say that between the Scorpius bracer and her cloak, there's a lot going on with this elf character that, well, until now, only I knew, was that none of it was originally Myth of Eustro. None of it originally was a part of the Myth of Eustro universe. Her design is built from 3 out of 4 characters from an old series that sort of just never really got off the ground. I kept trying to conceptualize it, and I would sketch it, and I would do thumbnails for it, and it just never got off the ground. It's from like the early 2000s, around the same time that I initially conceptualized the Myth of Eustro universe. You know, this was a separate project, but I had these 4 characters in it, and their design sort of I just meshed it all together into one character. It just worked as one character. So her cloak, the exterior of her cloak is one character, along with the Scorpius bracer, which were originally wristbands, like spiked wristbands that did the same thing that the Scorpius bracer does, where the little the spikes they come off and they have magical chains that the character used to whip around and could kill monsters and stuff. But she wore the cloak, and the cloak actually came up and it covered her face in the same way that the elf lady's face is covered. And it's funny now that I think about it. There were 2 characters whose faces were covered. It's so weird, because the scarf and then the elf lady's general look is also another character's look. The hair especially, and then the fact that the scarf covers the face. But then the pockets lining the interior of her cloak, that's the third character. Like, there was a character in there who had pockets that lined the inside of her. She wore a big fat coat, like a bubble coat, and she opened it up and she had all these dimensional pockets inside of her cloak. That's not the case with this cloak. Or I said her cloak, but I meant her jacket. But that's not the case with the cloak here. But we'll explain how the cloak works later. But this was just sort of me paying homage to my old characters that sort of died, I guess. Their place in the multiverse of me, it's no longer there. But yeah, again, those fighting scenes, the scenes where she's killing those Archine, they just don't have a lot of weight. Maybe the last panel does, but that 5th panel where she's actually striking the Archine, it's too floaty. It's way too floaty. But that's okay. I mean, I think they still sort of get the idea across, but my focus with this was more so the idea that the monsters turn to jewels. They just sort of fall apart. They just in a puff of magical cloud. Yeah, and then the bracer the Scorpius bracer sort of, it shatters. I'll again, another thing that I'll actually get more in depth in the story when I get the chance. I'm going to eventually play with some marketplace tropes from RPGs and JRPGs and just D&D in general. I like that kind of stuff, so I have a bunch of stuff in mind for that. But this was the introduction of some of the story mechanics with Ramona, and introducing it to Ramona and the reader was like the idea of lucid dreaming. Now, I only touch on it a little bit, but it was just sort of this vague notion that this whole thing might actually be a dream, or that that they might actually be dreaming. And eventually we'll get back to this thread. Eventually, but since the series is reader driven, it may take a while to get back to it. I'm very into lucid dreaming, and I frequently do. So I felt the need to make a series that actually played with the ideas that were presented to me. Presented to me in my dreams. And I actually thought about it, after I woke up, and just after years of this, and what does it mean when you're aware, and when you can control the world around you, or control elements of the world around you. And do you do good things? Do you do evil things? Do you act like a god? Are you aggressive? Are you passive? Do you engage? Do you try to dig deeper into it and try to figure out how this all works, why it's working the way it is, what that is about? And some other things, that I'll explore within the series itself. But I at least wanted to put in, like within the first few chapters, sort of seed a few bits of mystery, the overall mystery that kind of goes with this world. Mostly because of the character of Ramona herself. Ramona being new to this entire experience. I wanted her. She is sort of like the avatar of the reader, where you kind of come into it blind, not really knowing about a lot of things, except for a few things. Like in the first chapter, I introduced them. I introduce everyone to the concept. I introduce you to the concept of her being an archaeologist and what an archaeologist is, or at least wanting to be an archaeologist and what an archaeologist is, and then sort of push forward from there. But there's a ton of things that Ramona doesn't know, and so there's a ton of things that the reader doesn't know, and that's deliberate. And I thought it would be a better way to sort of unfold a mystery in there. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not. It could be disastrous. We'll see. Oh gosh, Crash Canyon. Honestly, I try not to be too negative in these, but wow, the Crash Canyon was supposed to look. It's supposed to look more like a town that was made up of wrecked airships and stuff, but I never got it right in the sketches. So in the final execution, it just sort of looks like a pile of, I don't know, craps. Sorry, I just really think I could have tried harder. Now that I look back on it, maybe a different angle would have inspired something visually cinematic or something. I wanted it to look not breathtaking, but awesome in the true definition of the word awesome. Just awe-inspiring. I wanted it to be like, it wasn't Ramona's first time, because this is technically the town that she came from, where not where she's from, but the town that she got the job from. Somebody was like, "Oh, there are Archine all around the town. Can you go out and fight them?" Because she said, "I'm an archaeologist," and someone said, "Oh, really? Okay." And they sent her out, and this is where she left out from to go take the job. But it doesn't look memorable. There's nothing memorable about it. It just sort of looks blah. And I regret. I mean, looking at it now, I regret not giving it my all. Not putting my heart 100% into it. In the execution of it, and really making it look like what I was thinking about in my head. But honestly, there's plenty of chances for that later. There's dozens of towns, and maybe this isn't the only town that's like that. Maybe I'll find an excuse later on in the series to do a town like that's conceptually like this, but executed better. Anyways, but I do like this shot of the people in the town. This was fun. I like crowd scenes because it gives you the chance to play with a variety of characters, shapes, and just expressions and just different characters. The thing that I did with this, I went ahead and started playing with introducing the idea of introducing new characters with, every so many chapters I introduce a new species. And with this one, I started introducing, there are a couple of them that you can see in here, like right now, you can see, well, we have a representation of humans, we have a representation of goblins, we have a representation of elves, we have a representation of dwarves, and we have a representation of brownies. The dwarves are deliberately in the shot because I was playing with with keeping with the Germanic tradition of, with the idea that Crash Canyon was sort of dug up from underground, and with like that Germanic tradition of dwarves being like they mine and they craft and they dwell in mountains and underground and stuff like that. And then it just sort of worked because they're rabbits. In the Myth of Eustro universe, dwarves are rabbits. And honestly, it was completely coincidence that they got to be the dwarves. It was a complete coincidence, but the second I realized it, which was many, many years later, I was just like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. Okay, leave it. Don't change anything about it. I was so happy that sort of worked out. It just worked out that way. But yeah, yeah. And then, of course, we come to the end of the chapter with the choice, the audience making the choice where Ramona gets to, which path does she take? Does she go and try to find Effie, who we see over here, and we don't know what's going on with him. We don't know if he's in trouble or anything, or do we follow the elf stranger at this point? She's still a stranger, and it's just letting the audience, letting the readers be the compass, not necessarily the moral compass, but just the deciding factor for Ramona. I like that aspect, but this one I had a hard time. I honestly don't think that the choice was super strong, and there are a few times that happened throughout the series early on, but I think the choices were different enough that you could let Effie wander around on his own and see what happens there, or you could try to finish. My thought was you could try to finish the earlier story with the talk that she was having, where she was talking about lucid dreaming and stuff like that, because she told Ramona that they'd talk more about it when they got into town. So that's what I was trying to do, that trying to make it so that maybe people would go, well, I want to maybe hear more about that, but then we maybe should investigate Effie. That's how I wanted the weight of the decision to be. But I don't know that it necessarily had that impact in the end. But that's what I was going for. And, and there's this is like the one sort of 100% goblin that's represented down there in the left hand bottom corner there. That goblin guy there, it looks like he works somewhere on a dock. You know, he's a fisherman or something. He's dressed like that, but that's, and you can see like the difference between an actual full-blooded goblin and then Ramona, who is half human and half goblin, where she has more human characteristics than she does goblin characteristics. Well, that's not completely true, because she does still look, she could easily pass for a goblin, except most people would probably double take and look at her and go, oh wait, and they'd realize, oh no, you're mixed. Okay, that's cool, whatever. But, well, except for within, the goblin community, they might treat her a little differently. I know they would. But you can also see that the goblins, a full-blooded goblin, is darker. The blue is darker on them than with Ramona. All of that's deliberate, but that's story stuff that we'll get into a little bit later. As Ramona, that's one of the things that Ramona that she deals with internally. But yeah, well, wow, we're at the end of this chapter, so that was really quick, honestly. But that's kind of what happens with the sort of new format that these have taken. It's easier to get through them. But gosh, thank you for listening to me ramble, just 100% rambling, just on and on and on. Especially that part earlier. Oh, sorry. Well, maybe there was something to be gained from that, me rambling. But yeah, thank you for listening, and thank you for watching, and especially thank you for reading. Bye.